Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Hoplite channel. I am your host, Hop, and you clicked on this video because you chose to see my belated tribute video to the late, great Eddie Van Halen. Yeah, so I actually filmed this tribute video about a week and a half ago, and when I was going through the editing, I realized there was some background noise. I think it might have been something in the basement that was making a racket. So the audio was terrible, and I decided, well, you know what? I'm not gonna put this out there. So I'll refilm it, and here we are. So yeah, Eddie passed away sadly October 6th. This is being filmed on the 28th. So yeah, a little bit late, but I still felt it was necessary to do it because of what a incredible talent in person Eddie Van Halen was. I grew up in the 80s and 90s as a kid listening to this music when it was coming out, and it's one of those periods of America that I was fortunate to witness, especially as a kid, because everything was brand new and everything had its own special place. But when I first heard the guitar work and the music of Van Halen, I distinctly remember where I was and who I was with when I heard it. It was that profound. I wasn't as big a fan as Van Halen well as I was a kid. I mean, obviously was aware of them, but as I got older, I grew more fond of those memories and went back and became a big Van Halen fan. And I kind of regret not being more of a fan at a younger age because the Van Halen music of its era was very positive. It was very upbeat. And when you were a kid, things that were upbeat and positive weren't edgy or cool enough. So you listened to it, but you didn't really, pay it as much attention as you did some of the more forbidden stuff like, thrash metal like Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Alice in Chains, and Black Sabbath. Those bands, those had more of my attention as a younger man because it was more, I guess you would say, hardcore. Although some people would say those bands aren't very hardcore nowadays. But when I was a kid, my parents definitely would have permitted me to listen to Van Halen over some of those thrash metal bands. But I got to listen to both, and yeah, I felt like doing this video for Eddie Van Halen was necessary because he was that influential of a musician. And I picked up the guitar when I was 16. I've been playing off and on since. I've actually been playing a lot more often these days. And I would be lying if I told you that Eddie Van Halen wasn't one of those reasons why I decided to try my hand at guitar. He was one of those musicians that everybody idolized and everybody looked on as a groundbreaker, an innovator, a Renaissance man who took that instrument to new heights. And for that reason, I've decided to do this video because I went for a run probably the day after I found out Eddie passed away on the 7th. I was just thinking about him and his influence and his abilities. And I just thought, man, was Eddie Van Halen our, once in 100 lifetimes kind of, human being? Was he that kind of a talent that we may never see the likes of him again? And it's doubtful, that generations that come after us will see his like either. And I thought back to the samurai literature series I did a couple weeks ago, or a month ago or so rather. And my favorite of the samurai literature series was Miyamoto Musashi, and what a incredible swordsman and figure he was in Japanese culture and Japanese history. And Eddie Van Halen being such an incredible figure and force in American culture. Are these two men similar in what they gave their respective cultures and people? And were they that rare that we may possibly never see their like? and I just thought about the two men, and I drew up some similarities that I found between both of them, and I figured I would share my thoughts about both as my tribute to Eddie, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you'll find some entertainment nonetheless. So anyway, let's begin with the lifespan of the two. Eddie Van Halen was born in 1955, and yeah, as I said earlier, he passed away October 6th this month, 2020, and he was 65, which is way too young. And it's kind of funny to think about, because he would have been like, my dad's generation, and to see, someone from your dad's generation go, that really, brings, mortality, back home. It's like, we are human beings, and we're not going to be here forever. Some of these people we idolize, be it celebrities, rock stars, war heroes, whomever, they're mortal just like we are, and they're not going to be here forever. And sometimes they go sooner than they should. Yeah. And Musashi himself was born in 1584 and died in 1645 AD, and he was 61. So both of these guys, lived to their early mid-60s. And we see that Eddie passed away on account of cancer, throat cancer, I believe. And this is possibly why he died so young. I think the interviews with him, he reported, he had drug and alcohol addiction off and on. Although I think by 2010 or so, he had kicked most of his drug addiction and almost all of his alcohol addiction, but he still smoked. And he picked up smoking, I think, around like 12 or 13 years old. This was, in the 60s and 70s, so we didn't really, monitor kids smoking as much, and didn't really have the same level of, I guess, medical background that we do today. But it was just one of those habits that Eddie couldn't kick. I mean, if you look at Eddie, he's synonymous with the guitar, and most famous his Frankenstrat guitar with the red and white and black stripes. But you always saw him with a cigarette too. You always saw him with a cigarette in his hand, his mouth, at his headstock when he would play. And you kind of wonder if he had never picked up a cigarette, would we have still had Eddie Van Halen, for another decade or so? It's anyone's guess. But Musashi also died of cancer, and I think they deduced that he had some form of stomach cancer. And he knew that something was coming over him when he felt this illness, and he secluded himself in a cave above his school in Japan. And it was over the course of the 3 years at the end of his life that he wrote the Book of the Five Rings, which I covered in the Samurai Literature series, and it was his greatest gift to mankind. It was his knowledge condensed into a book for everyone to read all over the world. Yeah. As far as a legacy, we know that Eddie had one son, Wolfgang, who plays the bass, I think, in Van Halen currently, and joined his dad mid-2000s as well. So yeah, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Wolfgang's a very accomplished musician like his dad. We see Musashi had 3 adopted sons, so he didn't have any blood heirs per se, but he adopted 3 men. One of the sons, I believe, committed junshi, which was seppuku, following his lord into death, which I think I said was kind of confusing, because during the Tokugawa shogunate, junshi was a practice that had been forbidden, but somehow Musashi's son, one of his sons, followed through with it. But the 2 men had boys, and they themselves came from accomplished men. We see Eddie's father was a man by the name of Jan Van Halen, and he was an accomplished jazz musician, I believe clarinet and saxophone. And it was because of Jan Van Halen that Eddie and his brother Alex became immersed in the arts of music. And specifically, he was classically trained. And referring to Alex, I think Alex gets short shrift in a lot of ways, because if you put Alex Van Halen in a different band than Van Halen, you would hear him and say that guy's an amazing drummer. I mean, he's probably one of the best ever. And I think Alex Van Halen is probably one of the best drummers of all time in rock and roll history. But because Eddie was just so mind-blowingly good at guitar, the drums don't get the attention that they should. But Alex, he also was inspired by his dad to pick up music. And it's funny because I believe Eddie said he bought a drum kit when he was younger and went out for the day. And when he came home, he heard Alex playing on his drum kit. And I think he was playing Wipeout or like some surf rock song. And when Eddie heard Alex play, he said, okay, yeah, you're a lot better than I am at drums. I'm going to play guitar instead. So as luck would have it, Alex naturally gravitated to the drums, and Eddie picked up the guitar and devoted all of his attention to playing it. And that's another thing too, is that people, no matter who you ask, despite Eddie's probably natural talent and skill, because his father was also accomplished in music, his work ethic was superhuman. They say Eddie would just play for hours and hours and hours, and he would tell people, if you want to be good at guitar, there's no other way around it. You just have to play and play and play and play again. And yeah, according to everybody who knew Eddie that went on the record, said the guy's work ethic was unbelievable. He would just play for hours, he would compose, he was a machine. Right. And we see Musashi's father was a man by the name of Miyamoto Musashi, and he was an accomplished swordsman. So we could see that both men, Eddie and Musashi, had fathers that were accomplished in a similar field. Here you had Jan Van Halen was with jazz music, and Shinmen was a swords master. So you could say that these two guys had kind of their calling already in their blood. Now let's find out about what they had for formal teaching. Eddie, according to interviews, he says that he never learned to read music but learned by watching. This interview I watched, I think it was in 2012, he said his parents wanted him to be a classical musician, so they got him piano lessons. And he had this really hard-nosed, like Lithuanian teacher who was a well-known pianist, and came to the Van Halen house, or rather they drove, I think they drove from Pasadena to San Pedro, which back in those days was a long way. And he would take lessons, but he never bothered to learn to read music. He just sat at the bench, and while his teacher played, he washed his hands and he heard the notes. And he just recreated it. So when you think about this, you're like, well, hold on, that seems kind of crazy. You're a kid, right? Eddie was a kid at this point. He wasn't a grown adult. But here's this adult playing these compositions, these pieces, and Eddie doesn't feel like learning the music. He just watches the guy and is able to play well enough that the music teacher thinks he knows how to read music. This is like savant level, like musical genius. This is like Mozart, like Beethoven. I believe both those men had reputations of being able to hear pieces or hear notes, and oh, that's a B flat, that's a C sharp, and they could actually compose something that was sung to them or played on a different instrument through a piano or what have you. Beethoven was practically deaf, and he had to hold a stick in his mouth, and the stick would actually go all the way to the base of the piano strings, because since he was so hard at hearing, he couldn't hear what he was playing. He had to literally feel the vibrations, through his cheekbone, through the stick. And that's how Beethoven composed music. So he never actually heard his music the way we hear his music. And that must be surreal to compose something so beautiful, and many compositions that Beethoven did, but never truly be able to hear it the way his audience hears it. Yeah, Eddie was a similar talent. They say he just naturally was gifted with music. He could watch you play something and he could pick it up. And we find that Musashi also had no formal training as far as the record is concerned. There's a belief that the Yoshioka school, where he fought one of his famous duels, that he may have had study there, However, there's nothing really conclusive to say, yes, Miyamoto Musashi studied at this school in 1595. Doesn't exist. So it's possible that Musashi, like Eddie, just picked up a sword, learned a certain skill set, either from his father or whomever, and once he had the basics down, he was able to develop his own art. And we see that this is exactly what happened with both men. So Eddie is famous, most famous rather, for perfecting the two-handed tapping technique, and this is basically what catapulted Eddie Van Halen and the band into superstardom. Was Eddie's ability to play orthodox style, but to also incorporate his picking hand and to tap on the fretboard and play with both. He played with both hands. He is not the first to have done this, however. I think flamenco guitarists as far back as 1860 probably or further have been known to tap the fretboard to play notes. And the lead guitarist for Genesis in the 70s also was known to occasionally tap the fretboard. But this Genesis, I wish I remember his name. I'll put him up here when I find out who he was. But everybody remembers Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins. But so he said he never met Eddie Van Halen, but when he saw Eddie taking the two-handed tapping technique and literally revolutionizing that method, he said it was all him. He had tapped in certain songs, but not at the speed and not with the complexity that Eddie Van Halen did. And Eddie was so good at this, their first album, Van Halen 1, people thought that their record players were broken, because when Eruption came on, they would hear Eddie play this solo, and it was so fast and it was so complex, they, for some reason, didn't think it possible, and that maybe their record player was playing at double or triple speed. It wasn't. It was just Eddie being that technically proficient and that fast. He was on a different level. And from the gates, everybody knew that this guy was something different. And Jan Van Halen actually played on the Diver Down album. He played clarinet when they did one of their cover songs. So after their stardom from Van Halen 1, Alex and Eddie brought their dad to play with them on their cover tracks. And Musashi, we know from the Samurai literature series, he made the two-handed sword style famous. This was he called it the two heavens. I think the Hyoho Niten Ichi Ryu. And this was where Musashi fought in duels and took his katana in one hand and drew his wakizashi in the other, and he fought with the long sword and the short. Is he the first guy to have ever done this? Probably not, right? The katana and the wakizashi had existed long before Musashi, over 500 years. So it's not, it's not reasonable to say that nobody ever thought about drawing their katana and their wakizashi and fighting with both hands. But it was Musashi who took that unorthodox style, like Eddie's two-handed tapping, and he made it his own style. And he became the most famous swordsman in Japanese history, probably because of his unorthodox style. He had no limits. He had no rules. He was literally the creator of his own craft and the master of it too. So he created something new, and then he mastered what he had created. Same as Eddie. Eddie had taken the two-handed tapping technique, which existed in other forms, but not in the way that he did it, and he mastered it. And he became a class on his own. I'll put the pictures of Musashi and Eddie up here to show that both of these men took an instrument, be it a guitar or a katana. The guitar is meant to be played two-handed, right? You have one hand fretting, you have one hand strumming. The katana is meant to be taken with both hands and swung broadly. But these men didn't think that way. They took their instruments and they devised new ways and literally changed the game, as cliche as that sounds, and became legends for doing it. And that famous picture of Musashi holding his wakizashi and his katana, and that picture of Eddie tapping his guitar, yeah, iconic. So yeah, on account of Eddie's influence, his music ability, and his revolutionizing the guitar, he's considered one of the greatest musicians of all time. And I do mean musicians, I don't just mean the guitar player, because in another interview, Eddie said most of his songs he composed on piano, which means he would play them on piano first, and then he would move over to guitar and play them on his guitar. So he's very versatile, and he wrote more or less all of Van Halen's biggest hits. Now, obviously, other guys in the band had a hand in the songs, but Eddie was the main influence behind Van Halen, behind their musical ability. He was the backbone. Alex too, because let's not forget, I mean, like, I remember where I was when I heard Eruption for the first time on Van Halen 1, but I also remember where I was when I heard the intro to Hot for Teacher, and Alex is playing that drum solo, the intro, and it sounds like, you know, the pistons timing on a V8 engine. It was crazy to hear that. It was just crazy to hear Eddie play his guitar the way he did, but to hear Alex play his drums on a different level as well, like, I mean, it's amazing. These two brothers are that good, and they're in the same band. So yeah, Eddie, without a doubt, I'd say is one of the greatest rock musicians of all time. And Musashi, yeah, no doubt about it, one of the greatest, if not the greatest swordsman in Japanese history. He's the Kensei, right? He's the sword saint. So I'd say if Musashi is the Kensei, the sword saint of Japan, I would nominate EVH as the guitar saint of America. Yeah, very sad that we lost him, but you know, time moves on, and I was talking to two friends not too long ago, and we're probably going to lose a lot of musical icons, geniuses, pretty much over the next 5 to 10 years. It's just, you know, everyone's getting older, and I don't see this talent coming along the way, you know, we were used to. And losing someone like Eddie Van Halen, it was a heavy blow, because that really closed the book on a era of American history, you know, from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, where like just rock music was king, and it was just it was fantastic. It was fun. Life just seemed easier back then. Of course, I was younger, so everything seems easier, but I just did feel like we didn't have the problems back then that we have today. And seeing him pass away just reminded me what a god-awful year freaking 2020 is. So hopefully there's some good news around the corner, because yeah, hearing Eddie passed earlier this month, on top of all the other stuff that happened this year, yeah, it was it knocked the wind out of me. But I do hope you are doing well. If you're a Van Halen fan, or if you were a fan of Eddie's, yeah, I'm sad right with you. But yeah, I just want to thank everybody who came to watch this. If you know anybody else who's a EVH fan, who or like samurai literature, feel free to share it. Give it a thumbs up if you like the video, or subscribe if you like the channel. And yeah, Eddie Van Halen, 65 years, gone too soon. But what an incredible life he was able to pack into that short time. So anyway, this has been the Hoplite channel. Appreciate you coming by once again. And we'll see you in the next video, whenever that may be. Till then, take it easy.